welcome to another episode of the CPG Guys podcast. Our hosts, Sri Rajgopalan, Peter V.S. Bond, and Brian Gildenberg explore how brands and retailers engage consumers in an increasingly digitally driven world. And now, here are the CPG Guys.
Hello, folks, and welcome to this episode of the CPG Guys podcast, where we, of course, explore the omni-channel digital journey of brands, retailers, service providers. I'm your co-host, Sri, and I'm joined today by my other co-host, Mr. PVSB of Peter, Partnership Acceleration Lead at Flywheel Digital. Peter, Yankee suck, Dodgers suck. They're about even at this stage. All-Star break is barely weeks away. But tell me how you are sitting up there in Connecticut and watching the Dodgers. Are you sulking as much as I am sitting in LA and watching the Yankees?
I'd love to say I'm sulking, but honestly, Sri, as we go to record this, I'm preparing to head to Chicago next week for the Path to Purchase Institute Retail Media Summit. And I think I have, in addition to the 3 presentations I'm giving, I have 2 dinner appointments and probably 8 other appointments in a 3-day period. So not to mention the fact that I've organized a group photo of the 30 previous podcast guests from the CPG Guys that are all going to be at the event together. So very busy planning going on right now. I don't have time to worry about baseball. I'll start paying a little bit more attention when we get closer to Labor Day. How about that?
I never thought I would hear out of your mouth that you don't care about baseball.
I didn't say I didn't care. I said I'll pay a little more attention in early September. How about that? I mean, like, what am I going to do? That I'm not really happy. I'd be more happy if it weren't for the fact that their fortunes are being diminished by the despised and vile San Francisco Giants. We'll just leave it at that.
There we go. The French are starting to come out, says the guy who's wearing the baseball jersey with the 42 Jackie Robinson on his back.
Yeah. Oh, by the way, I should mention, that the third leg in our stool, Mr. Gildenberg, has his new CPG Guys jersey as an homage to his favorite baseball team. So I think the 3 of us now, when we get together next, have to don our baseball outfits.
We got him beat by one thing in the baseball jersey game because we have number 42.
Well, that is true. That is true. Number 42, man.
But we've always said this is a baseball podcast that talks about other things. So
it's disguised as an e-commerce podcast and non-channel digital. But yeah, Sri, great to be on this journey. Looking forward to today's conversation because we love nothing more than speaking about entrepreneurs, startups, and particularly when it's around causes and missions. And I think we'll find that today's guest has a really powerful mission in the brand that he's building, and I can't wait to get to the conversation.
This one, I think, is a true brander because he's actually got his portfolio behind him. So for those of you watching, you'll get to see the portfolio. But before we get to our guest, let me remind our audience to visit cpgguys.com on a website where you can actually find links to our podcast on all the major podcast platforms. And if you're not already doing so, please follow us on LinkedIn, where we publish new content every single day of the week. Some days is even multiple pieces of content, Monday through Sunday, even on the weekends. Our audience, of course, is 23,000 plus, and I can't thank you enough for following us, giving us recommendations on where to focus and who to bring on the show. Subscribe to the other podcasts in our collective, including the FMCG Guys, CPG Scoop, and our new edition, the CPG Guys Fast Forward, starring our very own partner, Mr. Brian Gildenberg himself. Proud to be sponsors of Next Up, formerly network of executive women whose mission is to advance all women in business, promote gender equality in the workplace. If you're a female founder, do not have a sponsorship through your org, let us know by dropping us an email at contact@cpgguys.com, and Peter, me, and Brian are happy to sponsor your membership to this elite organization. Also excited that this episode's focus will be a startup founder, the founder and CEO of A Dozen Cousins, Mr. Ibraheem Basir.
Thank you guys for having me.
The digital liner notes of this episode contain hyperlinks to our site, the other collective podcast sites, our LinkedIn page, and our landing page on the Next Up site. So, Peter, let's get to the magic words and the main event, should we?
Let's get ready to not violate copyright infringement laws by saying things that other people have quoted. How about that, Sri?
There we go.
Go CPG Guys.
A Dozen Cousins is the story of a double Ivy Leaguer, a marketer, a brand developer and scale CPG, and a founder of a brand anchored on family values. Yes, family values. What does that mean, Sri? That's the question you have for me. We're about to find out in a few. So I dropped a LinkedIn message to a guest today a few months ago and asked him if he'd like to come, showcase the organization. He didn't respond. But then I tracked him down at Expo West because he lives in LA, I live in LA. And then a happenstance engagement at a Fortune 500 we were sitting together in the seat and having coffee at. And here we are 4 weeks later recording this episode. Our guest today is a Wharton MBA, UPenn grad, followed by a large CPG brand such as Unilever and none other than General Mills. Join us in welcoming the CEO and founder of A Dozen Cousins, Ibraheem Basir. Ibraheem, welcome, man. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. Just to be clear, I didn't ignore your LinkedIn message, but there's a very high volume that I do receive, and so apologies if I missed that.
No apologies needed. We're doing the show. We're happy to have you here. Great to have you join us today. But before we get to the questions we've prepared for our conversation and kind of get into how Dozen Cousins was developed and where you are, can you take a moment and share briefly for our audience an overview of A Dozen Cousins?
For sure. In a nutshell, we're a natural food brand that makes convenient meals and side dishes that are inspired by traditional Creole, Caribbean, and Latin American recipes. So we have today 4 product lines. The first is a line of seasoned beans. They're all fully cooked and ready to eat. We have a line of rice that's cooked in bone broth. It has 7 grams of protein and a few grams of collagen. We have a line of entree seasoning sauces that help you make a restaurant quality entree in 20 minutes or less. So think jerk chicken, pollo a la brasa, pollo asado. And then finally, we have our rice seasoning sauces, which in my humble opinion, the most innovative of the bunch. And that is the world's only wet seasoning for rice. So think about wanting to cook coconut rice at home or Mexican red rice. We're using real coconut milk, onion, garlic puree, etc. So that's the business in a nutshell, and excited to dig in deeper.
Awesome, Ibrahim. Congratulations on all the success and starting to achieve scale. At some point in this conversation, we're going to come back to the portfolio and ask you to take a deeper dive by SKU. And we'll, of course, include links to your LinkedIn profile, your corporate website of A Dozen Cousins, where people can buy the product and be referred to where to buy in the digital liner notes of this podcast episode so that 90+% of the people listening to this episode on the mobile device can easily learn more as they listen with a simple click. So I'm going to kick it off with the first question, Ibrahim. Your career, of course, has elite brands in your background, but you decided to be an entrepreneur. You're from Brooklyn. That's where you grew up. Take us through your life story, man, from Brooklyn to Ivy Leagues, and now as a founder of A Dozen Cousins. And then what is the advice you would give someone growing up in a similar path, growing up in that New York City area or anywhere in this country, in a city, on how to follow in your footsteps and then have the guts at 5-6 years or maybe even less in your career journey to have the guts to move out from a stable paycheck and start something elite yourself?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for the kind words. Thank you for that intro. To build on it, as you mentioned, I'm from Brooklyn originally, and I grew up in a really big family. So I have 9 siblings, 11 nieces and nephews. And then when my eldest daughter was born, she was the 12th cousin, which is where the brand gets its name from. But just going back to my own childhood, I think there's a lot that comes from being in a big family. First and foremost, that's really where I formed my initial connection with food and the way that it kind of was almost like a glue for us. That dinner time, you got 12 people piled into the living room, dining room, kind of spread out. We're eating dinner, we're sharing stories, we're kind of, debriefing on the day. Same thing when we had holidays and celebrations. Food was always kind of the central thing that we planned around. It was like, okay, what are we eating on that day? And so I grew up with a real strong connection and a passion for food. Fast forward many years, I did my undergrad and my grad school at the University of Pennsylvania. I ultimately went back to Wharton and got my MBA in marketing. And I knew even when I was in business school that I ultimately wanted to become an entrepreneur. My father was an entrepreneur. That's what I had observed and seen growing up. And so in some ways, becoming an entrepreneur felt more like returning to my roots, if you will, than a different adventure in many ways. But the reason I started my career at General Mills, as you mentioned, is like I felt like I really wanted that training, and the simple test that I always gave myself in those early years in my career was, if somebody gave you $1 million to run a company, would you know what to do with it? And when I was in business school, I don't know that I would have, right? Like, I don't know if you gave me $1 million, maybe I would have spent 500,000 on something silly, I don't know. But By the time I finished my work at General Mills, I felt like I really understood the drivers of good CPG, right? Like starting with a differentiated product, having an evocative brand and clear packaging, knowing how to efficiently drive trial and, generate awareness behind the product, how to sell to a retailer, how to vet a supply chain. Like, there were so many things that I learned there that by the time I left to start A Dozen Cousins, I felt very comfortable and confident, in my abilities. And obviously that doesn't mean there wasn't risk, but it felt like just a natural progression of kind of the journey that I was on. So, I'll pause there and see where you might want to dig in.
Ibraheem, thank you so much for joining us today. My family's from Brooklyn as well, fourth generation from Flatbush, which is why we're all Trolley Dodger fans up until my generation.
Very cool. I was going to say, I saw the homage to Jackie Robinson on the jersey. I knew there was a Brooklyn connection there.
Jackie's my hero. What he dealt with, the adversity that came his way, and how he dealt with it, the word grace just oozes out of Jackie Robinson's legacy, and I'm so incredibly honored. Every time I create a jersey or anything else, it always has the number 42 because Jackie was the man. He was just the man. There's no two ways about it. Hey, listen, I want to get into your founding the business because this is really interesting. I want to get a sense for launching, right? We're very focused on omni-channel digital. And what I'd like to understand is, did you start this off as a digitally native brand? Did you start it in physical retail? Were you trying to tackle both at the same time? And, how did you allocate your time against it? And particularly as you're creating kind of the ethos of the brand, you have a very mission-focused brand that you've created. Why don't you talk to our audience a little bit about the mission that you've kind of ingrained into the story of the brand and how you see that as being a component driving the brand success?
Thank you for that. First I would say, just from a mission perspective, our mission at Dozen Cousins is very simple, which is we want to use food as a way to celebrate culture and inspire people to live healthier, right? Like it comes down to those two things. And, on the culture side, as I mentioned in kind of my intro, food is so central to the way that many people see themselves, to the way that they celebrate, to the way that they fuel their body, to the way that they relax. And so when you have, and this is the case in many like natural product brands or in some parts of the industry where it's like, it's completely disconnected from culture, where the feeling is like, okay, if you want to eat healthy, you got to leave all of that stuff behind and then start eating this stuff over here. And I never really subscribed to that, right? And so when I started A Dozen Cousins, for me, the goal was like, look, the foods that we eat and that we grow up with, they're meaningful to us, they're special to us, and you can still enjoy them with really great ingredients, really great quality. So that drives the company, and it drives everything we do, from like how we develop our products, how we design our packaging, who we hire to be on the team, who we work with to promote the brand. It all comes back to that element of like celebrating culture.
If I could follow up with you on, as you started thinking about how you were going to go to market, because you talked to General Mills about understanding a supply chain. How did you think about it? Did you come out of the gate as digitally native or physical, or were you doing both at the same time?
I'll answer it in two ways. They might seem a little contradictory. First, the very first retailer or the first platform we were on was Amazon. For about 6 months, we were on Amazon only. And then at month 6, we launched nationwide at Whole Foods. So, yes, technically we were a digital first brand, but I've always believed in the importance of retail. We obviously were pitching retailers before we even launched the business, right, to try to get a head start. And, to me, I have a different approach maybe than others. Like, I don't care where people buy our product, honestly. If you want to get it at a swap meet, if you want to get it at Walmart, if you want to get it on an airplane, you know what I mean? Like, we want to solve a need. If you're hungry, you need a convenient meal, we want to be there and available where you want to buy it. So we've always had that perspective. We've never had a big D2C business. We weren't overly prescriptive in terms of like what retailers we would go to. It was more about starting from the places we thought the demand was strongest and where we would turn the best and where people wanted us the most, and then just working our way down the list. The last thing I'll say there, just to give a specific example, we launched into Walmart our second year in business. And this was like very controversial amongst, our advisors and some of our investors of like, hey, Walmart is, they're not particularly health conscious as in terms of their consumer base. It's a really big retailer. Do you want to go there now? And my perspective was, look, they have the most diverse consumers in America. They understand the importance of dinner, meals, and side dishes. If our product is going to work anywhere, it should work at Walmart. Fast forward a couple years, Walmart's now our most heavily assorted retailer. We have 11 SKUs on shelf there across 3 different categories. And, that was just an example of like, you don't always have to follow maybe the obvious approach to building out your distribution footprint.
Can I ask you about content as well? The role of putting content out there on the brands, like how does that work for you? And how do you actually create content about what you offer?
Yeah, I'll start by saying like I think it's an area where we're good but not great. You know what I mean? Like there are other brands and individuals that I look at that I think are like experts when it comes to content marketing and that. So I won't put us in that top tier, but what I will say is like we use content as a way to tell the story of the brand. At the end of the day, every channel that you're communicating with people with, it plays a different role. The packaging and what you can see on shelf, we're able first and foremost to communicate the product, its benefits, why you should buy it. We can tell a little bit of the brand story on package, but you can't do much with that just 6 inches, right? Content allows us to go deeper and we can talk about things like how did jerk chicken develop in Jamaica, right? We can talk about things like the connection between South American and Southern food, you know what I mean? And like all those types of things, like the deeper stories that you can't tell in 60 seconds on patch, you can do through content. And the only other thing I would add there is like I do think we're living in the age of content, right? Like every person is a content creator, whether they realize it or not. People are photographing themselves, they're filming their vacations, they're sharing it on social, they're sending it to family. It's kind of the language by which people communicate. And so, as a brand, you have to kind of take part in that.
One of the things that come to my mind is as a minority founder, like I have been in a past life, I started a supplements brand and came out of it about 3 years ago, competing with very large giants in the food space. How does your everyday thinking go? Do you have the same equal opportunities in front of you? What drives you to wake up every day and bulldoze through challenges that you may have on your plate? What is success to you at the end of the day then? And how's your everyday interaction with retail?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting questions there. I'll hit a couple of points. First, in terms of being like a minority founder, and this is true for being a minority in the United States, which is at a macro statistical level, we know that we're facing a disadvantage. The data will tell you that very easily, right? In terms of likelihood to be hired, likelihood to be fired, likelihood to raise capital, beliefs about your intelligence and competence, biases that people hold. All those things at a population level are indisputable. The data has been clear and re-researched and reestablished hundreds of times. What's difficult sometimes is that on the micro level, it's impossible to know why any given thing is happening. You know what I mean? If a particular investor says no to your business, could it be bias? Sure. Could it be that they don't believe in the thesis? It could be that as well. Do they not believe in you as a founder? Yes, it could be that. There's a million reasons. And so for me, what's most useful on the day-to-day level is not to even think about it, right? Like it's not relevant to me why a particular outcome is happening. It's just, okay, let's move to the next one, right? That didn't work. What's my next chance to do it? And so that's the mindset that I've had my whole life. Before I was a founder, when I was a student, when I was applying to things, like, it's the way you have to operate. So I do think, thankfully that I have probably a level of persistence, tenacity, that's a little above average, but I do think a lot of minorities face the same situation.
In terms of your partnership with retail, how do you go about it every single day? Like, are you finding new retail? Are you getting introduced? Is your team large enough where they're hunting for you? Are you going to conferences? Like, how does that engagement happen?
Yeah, it's of course evolved in the life of the company, right? Like our earliest retailers, we found through like Expo West, Expo East, right? So like being at expos, being able to have those live interactions. We also did a ton of just cold emailing. Like I sent samples. This is pre-COVID where people were all at least in one place, so you knew where their office was at least. So like, I'd send samples to buyers and someone in business development, someone on the marketing team, right? It was kind of like super scrappy, kind of just get your brand in front of people however you can. As the brand has grown and evolved, we've had a chance to bring on brokers, right? So now we work with a great set of brokers who do have relationships with a lot of the retailers we want to get into. And so that initial interaction is a little bit easier in the sense of like, hey, we'll get you 15 minutes and then it's your job to kind of tell the story. And then, evolving even further, we now have a VP of sales who's in-house, who leads that team as well. So I'm doing, on the day-to-day, a little bit less of like the prospecting and the initial outreach than I probably did in the early days of the business, but still very important, to play a role in the sales process.
And then before I turn it over to Peter for the next one, just one follow up on the retail piece. Obviously now that you got brokers in the house and you're getting showcased at retail often, did you have to achieve some sort of medium success on Amazon that you could take and tell stories with, or were you able to go straight out because of the brand promise?
It's a great question. I think, and I got to have a lot of credit to Whole Foods because Whole Foods granted us nationwide distribution before we had sold a single bean. And so, shout out to Christina Pearson if she's out there. She was the category manager at the time for shelf stable vegetables, which was our first product category. And that took a show of insight, foresight by her, right, to lean into premium beans. We were the first pouch bean, seasoned beans in that set, and we went nationwide with no sales data. And from there, we've been able to just build it more as like a staircase, right? Where it's like, hey, we're doing well at Whole Foods. You should bring us in at, Publix. Hey, we're doing well at Publix. You should bring us in at Kroger. Like, on and on, right? It's like from there, they kind of build on each other, but it does take that first retailer to see the category opportunity and to kind of believe in the brand. And so, again, I give a lot of love to Whole Foods for that.
All right. So why don't you walk our audience through your entire portfolio, the categories that you have built your business around, and what makes each of those categories in your mind superlative to some of the offerings that you find in mainstream grocery retail?
Yeah, so first of all, just at a high level, the thing that I love about our portfolio is we play in what I would consider like forgotten categories. These are categories that are not seeing a ton of innovation, but they're still super central to people's lives, right? And so if I start with beans, which was the first product that we launched in, like beans are not sexy by any means, but if you just take a step back and think like these are some of the healthiest foods on the planet, right? Pound for pound, legumes, high in protein, high in fiber, lots of vitamins and minerals. There's a cultural relevance to beans in almost every culture in the world, whether you're talking about, Asian cuisine, West African cuisine, Caribbean, Latin American, right? Like there's a connection to the category. And so for me, I'm like, man, there's a $3 billion category that we all love that's super healthy for us and nobody's doing anything in it, right? And so we launched our seasoned beans really around how do we bring a home quality, slow simmered pot of beans into your kitchen so that you can eat it in 60 seconds or less, right? And so the thing that sets those products apart is first and foremost just the convenience and taste level, right? Like many people will eat beans when they're at a restaurant. Very few people will cook them on their own at home and feel like they have the ability to deliver an excellent pot. And so that's what we provide them, right? On a functional level, there's things, of course, like the pouch is microwavable. You can just take it on the go and warm it easily. We use avocado oil as opposed to lard or canola oil or some of the other oils that you see being used in the category. So it's like a great ingredient profile. So that's the first thing I'll say about beans. And then if I kind of go down the narrative, when we launched our beans, the thing that we saw was that people were buying a ton of rice, right? It was the most commonly cross-purchased item with us on Amazon. That makes sense. Obviously, beans and rice together, it's like peanut butter and jelly, right? And so we knew we wanted to enter the rice category. And the question for us was, what can we do that's actually differentiated there, right? There's a million different ways to eat rice, cook rice, buy rice. And what we landed on was bone broth. It was trending at the time on social media and still is. You can see people using chicken broth and bone broth as an easy way to improve the flavor of rice. They also are using it to add extra nutrients. And so for us, basically, we have rice that has 7 grams of protein, a few grams of collagen, completely unheard of in the category to this day. And it's doing great for us in market. And then the third platform that we launched, and again, following the same logic, once people were eating our beans and rice, 90% of them were cooking some chicken to go along with it. You know what I mean? So we're like, okay, we can just round out the dinner plate. And so we launched our entree seasoning sauces really to say, hey, what's the best and easiest way to season a good piece of chicken, right? You can use a marinade, but it takes a couple of days and you have to be prepared to know what you're going to cook, right? You can use dry seasonings. Those are very quick, but you miss a lot in terms of the aromatics, the onion, the garlic, the fresh peppers. And of course, you can hook up something from scratch, but most people don't have time to do that. So for us, what we did is we essentially created like this really cool blend. It's not a marinade. It's thick enough that you can just coat your meat and put it straight on the grill or put it straight in the air fryer. But it also is wet, so you get that onion, garlic, pepper, kind of the deeper flavors. So That's our portfolio in a nutshell. If I had to tie it all together, I would simply say ultra convenient, culturally authentic, really great ingredients, and that's true of everything we do.
I love all those words you said at the end, culturally authentic, because I'm hoping you're using those in your marketing tags. But let me remind our audience that we're speaking with Ibraheem Basir, the CEO and founder of A Dozen Cousins, a food brand. So, Ibrahim, in a world of omnichannel consumers where the digital reach of food has exploded in the last 3 years, to the point where I think we can now quote public statistics that 15% of all food is really done via e-commerce these days. Are there specific advertising techniques you use, recommend, etc., for wins for any brand, small, large, and are there ones that you find to be the clear leaders like search or the tagging you can do? What's your advice and what's working for you?
For us, search is 100% kind of king. And specifically, we believe strongly in like digital retail. So think about accounts like Amazon as an example, where people are going on there with something in mind, right? Like I don't go on Amazon to just browse and see what I'm going to find. You know what I mean? I hop in that search box and start looking for what I need. And so for us, the purchase intent is so high that we love to be there, right? If you're looking for black beans, you're going to be offered A Dozen Cousins. If you're looking for some hiking or camping food, you're going to see an offer from us, right? If you're looking for, something I can put in a microwave, microwavable meal, microwavable side, you get my point, right? You'd be surprised that the pretty vast number of avenues that ultimately lead back to a purchase in our product. And we wouldn't have had some of that data or opportunity without search, right? So that to me is number one. And, I'd also shout out accounts like Thrive Market, accounts like Hungry Root. Again, all those digital retail accounts, we like them a lot. And it's very efficient to kind of convert people from what they're seeking to what the right option is. An area where we candidly don't have a lot of experience or success is D2C. We don't, as a business, prioritize that channel very much. Obviously, a lot of the marketing you encounter on social media and things of that nature is meant to drive to D2C. But for us, we find that people actually like purchasing our products at retail, whether that is a digital retailer or a brick and mortar retailer. Like they like the convenience of filling up their pantry all in one spot and not necessarily hunting and pecking for individual brands on their own website. So that's my quick perspective, but happy to answer any follow-ups there.
Yeah, I have a couple for you, Ibrahim. So when you think about search, particularly paid search, have you contracted a third-party managed service business to help you with that? Are you using third-party tools? Are you just using the tools that are native? Like, are you working with Walmart Connect to advertise on Walmart? Are you just using the Amazon ad? How do you go about creating the ability to scale out that retail media advertising to make sure that you're winning at search?
Yeah, respectfully, I'm going to be a little bit cagey about exactly the tools and the people we use to deliver. I think, it's candidly taking a lot of trial and error to get to what we think is the right set of tools and capabilities. So I will leave all my competitive listeners to figure that out on their own. What I will say is that these platforms are, I think, very developed in terms of their internal capabilities and the tools that they have to help you leverage their consumers, right? And so that would always be my starting point, particularly if you're a young brand who's just looking to like, hey, get your feet wet. It's like Amazon is pretty good in terms of helping you understand the right terms to bid against, how much to bid, so on and so forth. And so I would start there. And then I would say for, like I said, the mature brands that are scaling, there are a couple of ways to skin the cat. And we like the one that we found.
Fair enough.
On the same topic, which is winning search, advertising, etc., what do you recommend, using agencies or trying to figure it out oneself?
Yeah, so I guess that's going back to the question Peter mentioned. That's where I'm going to just be a little cagey in terms of the way that we go about executing rather the business. But hopefully it's okay if I just leave it there. Yeah.
Hey, if you answer the questions the way you want.
That means, Peter, he's got tricks up his sleeve. That's what that means.
That's okay. Listen, there's got to be. It's like asking him for the recipes for his sauces. I think we have a better chance of getting those than we do to get his retail media strategy.
I've looked up the recipes on his website.
Well, it shows you the ingredients. It doesn't tell you the proportions. All right. So let's talk a little bit about your distribution strategy going forward. You started in Amazon. You quickly moved into retail in where I would have expected you to be, especially natural. Whole Foods is an obvious extension, but then you took a little bit of a crazy Ivan and off you went into Walmart and found some great success there where you have an incredible portfolio of distribution. So how do you think about building out and creating a strategy that is challenging but achievable over the couple of years? And what are the primary measurements of success in this distribution strategy?
Yeah, our strategy is very simple in the sense of we want to start with the accounts where we think we are going to perform the best. And then we want to incrementally move into accounts where we think we're going to do worse and worse, right? So that's like step one. And the same is true of the doors that we go in, right, within an account. So if we're launching into Walmart, of course, we're not going to launch into 4,000 stores on day one, right? We want to start with the stores that we think we're going to perform the best in and then go from there. And the goal, of course, is always to just have good momentum so that you're building a story that you can build upon. But B, it's just a more efficient way to grow, right? And the key measurement, of course, that we're looking at is velocity, meaning, how many units are we selling in a given store in a given week? And so by following that kind of, I think, pretty simple approach, it just guides us, right? If it's like, hey, I have option A and option B. Option A, the consumer is willing to spend a premium. They understand health and wellness. They understand diverse flavors. I'm going to go there versus a place where I feel like it's a value-seeking consumer. They don't understand culture or the flavors that we're going after, so on and so forth. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of how I think about it. And thankfully, it's flowed pretty naturally from that approach.
And if I could just add on to that, obviously the pandemic had supply chain constraints on everyone. I'd love for you to some degree to flesh out for us a bit some of the challenges you faced and how you addressed them, both from the supply side, but also on the demand side with so many retailers where you had commitments to try and get the products to help them satisfy the demand of their consumers. How did you deal with the pandemic in particular?
Yeah, there were layers to it, man. Even within COVID, it was like 2 or 3 distinct eras in terms of how it all unfolded, and the early days, the biggest challenge for us was just the huge spike in demand, right? Like there really is no business, or there was no business that was set up to see a 10x or 20x spike in demand in the course of February and March of 2020, if you will, right? Those first few months where everyone was just like, look, filling up my house with as much food as I can possibly get. And it is what it is, right? So that was our first kind of challenge. And there, of course, the difficulty is like, okay, how do I get back in stock quickly enough so that A, I can get more sales, B, I don't get that space on shelf taken from me, so on and so forth, right? And so that was the challenge that we navigated. And, I give a lot of credit to our manufacturing partners at the time that they were equally up to the challenge, you know what I mean, in terms of running overtime, running weekends, getting as much product out into the marketplace as they could. And so in the early days of COVID, we actually didn't experience a lot of out of stock relative to some of our peers, right? And some of that was we were small as well, so it was easier for us to get back in stock. 1 or 2 production runs could get us healthy again. That's what I would call like COVID phase 1 challenge, right? Phase 2 challenge for us specifically was, okay, there was a meaningful shift of demand online and we weren't really prepared for it, right? Meaning at that point, I don't even think we had a direct to consumer website. So people were literally emailing us like, hey, I'll PayPal you some money or I'll Venmo you some money. Can you send me some beans, right? And we were like, look, we can't do that, but it did force us to want to set up a direct-to-consumer channel so that we at least had a way for those consumers that really just needed the product, didn't have it at their local retailer, to be able to access the product. And so we set up D2C. That was kind of like our wave 2 challenge. And then our wave 3 challenge, which who knows, maybe we're still in, has been like just inflation, right? Which is labor markets very tight. Labor prices are up. We went through the whole era of logistics challenges, right, where you couldn't get a truck or the trucks were short supply. So there's just a lot of cost inflation, in that kind of last wave of COVID, if you will. And we're not big enough necessarily to be like a market shaper, right? Like we're not going to go out and buy a fleet of trucks to avoid logistics inflation, right? Like we kind of have to take the market pricing and respond accordingly. But, again, thankfully we've been able to kind of make it through that period.
Thank you for that. COVID clearly changed the game for a lot in food. And first time I've heard someone tell me that people were actually paying and saying, hey, I'll pay you by PayPal, etc. But that is fascinating to hear that, but also tells story of the times of how dire situations got that people really needed access to food. So I want to jump to talent and human capital because no organization can be successful without the right set of leaders and brand stewards. You were a brand steward yourself at some point and have driven incredible successes for the brands you touched in a previous life and what you're touching now with Dozen Cousins. So what makes a good leader? Like what constitutes the DNA of a good leader? How do those leaders that you hire connect with you and lead the cause of brand equity growth for Dozen Cousins?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'll say a few things. First and foremost, to me, and I agree with what you said, that people are the most important ingredient to a company's success, right? Like at any point past the very early stages, you can't do it all yourself, and you need other people who can execute at a really high level. So I agree with that 100%. The first thing for me, it starts with the mission of the company, right? And I say that to say when we hire someone, almost always the reason that they are choosing us versus any other place they could work is because of the mission and what we're trying to do in the world, right? Around celebrating culture, inspiring healthier living, the products that we've lined up against that mission. That's really it's the only advantage we have versus pick a company that can probably pay them more, that can give them more perks and have a gym in the office and all that kind of stuff that goes along with it. What we present to people is, look, you're going to work in a place where we're working towards something that is really meaningful, where you're going to work with peers who respect and care about this work as much as you do. And hopefully we're going to do great results, right? So that's the first thing I would say, just like from an attraction perspective. On my side, in terms of who are the people who I want to bring into the company, obviously there's the technical skills that people need to do a particular job well. Just assume that that's table stakes, right? Like you're not going to hire a supply chain person who doesn't understand what an MOQ is or how to think about ordering supplies, right? So that's done. So then it becomes a question of, how are they going to go about getting their work done? And so for us, we basically established these three operating principles. We use them whenever we're hiring someone. The first is that we want people who are conscientious and high integrity, right? So the very simple way to think about this is if they say they're going to do something on Monday and they don't do it, they're going to send you an email and let you know, hey, I'm running late. I'm going to get this to you tomorrow. They're not going to wait for you to follow up with them. They're not going to say, oh, did I say Monday? No, I think I said Thursday. Like we don't want those kind of people in the company. We've all worked with them. They're annoying and they slow you down and prevent good things from getting done. So that's number one. Number two, we want people who are really curious. My belief is that the pace of change in the world today is we've never seen anything like this in human history, right? The pace at which knowledge becomes obsolete and new knowledge is created. So you can be an expert if you want, but the reality is whatever you were an expert on won't be relevant in a couple of years, maybe a couple of months, depending on what you're working on. And a good example here is TikTok. 3 years ago, TikTok was a joke. It was a bunch of little kids dancing on screen. They weren't even doing normal looking dances, right? 3 years later, I'd argue it's the most powerful content engine that's ever been created, right? And that happened pretty quickly. So you want marketers who are paying attention, experimenting, trying things out, asking questions. Why do I think this is working? Where do I think this is going? So that's number two. And then the third one is we want people who are culturally connected, and obviously that's central to what we do as a brand. If you're the type of person who someone offers you a new dish, you say, I don't really want to try that. I don't, that doesn't look good. Or, you know what I mean? You don't like going on vacation because people don't speak English or any of these types of things. You're probably not going to be a good fit here. We want people who they love culture. They love experiencing new people, new things. They're curious about the world. They're going out and experimenting with it and living with it. So those are our operating principles. So far they've served us well. Maybe they'll need to evolve at some point as we grow. But for now, I think it's doing good for us.
All right. Well, let me round this out with looking towards the future, as we always like to end our conversations. As you think about building out your business, how do you consider is the recipe for growth around expansion within the categories you're already competing, doing new flavors, new treatments? Is it about entering new categories? Is it about entering new channels, like getting into food service? Is it about where do you think you want to take this business and how do you evaluate all these different growth opportunities for your focus of your attention?
Yeah, first of all, thank you for this question. First and foremost, we've innovated very rapidly as a business, right? So again, as we talked about at the outset, we're in three categories. Really, we've been in market for about 3 years, right? So almost every year we've launched a new product category. And so as I look ahead to the next, call it 12 to 24 months, for us, it's all about getting the products we've already created out into the world, right? And that looks in some cases like expanding assortment. So, we have a lot of retailers that carry our beans. They don't yet carry our rices, or they carry our rice, but they don't yet carry our seasoning sauce. And so we want to get those kind of accounts well assorted. And so we're working on that. And then second, we have a lot of retailers that have us in just the East Coast or just the Southeast or just the West Coast. And we're excited to go national with those retailers. So I do think a lot of the growth we'll see hopefully over the next year or two is really improving our assortment and door count within our existing retail partners, right? If I had to add the third growth driver, there's still a lot of net new retail accounts that we think we perform really well in, but that we just haven't gotten on shelf yet. So an account like HEB, we got any HEB people out there listening, right? Like, we think that's a great account, one that we want to be in. We're not there yet, right? And so there are others that are like that, where it's just, we have to build the business brick by brick. But those are the things we're focused on. In terms of portfolio, we're really happy and excited about the products that we have. They all are beloved. If you look at like our product reviews on Amazon, if you look at the comments we see on social, we feel like we have products that people love and want to eat and want to have in their pantry. And it's just a question of making sure they can buy it in as many places as possible.
Shri, we know a couple of people at HEB, don't we?
HEB, does the name Ashwin ring a bell?
Yeah, and my dear friend Michelle Metzger, who's in the loyalty team. Yeah, exactly.
Hopefully they're listening, or maybe we can make a reach out for Ibraheem over here.
I may be seeing one of them at the Fancy Food Show this weekend in New York City. We'll see. Yeah.
So let me remind the audience that you can find all our content at cpgguys.com. And of course, if you think you or your company has some thought leadership to contribute to our growing community here, drop us an email at contact@cpgguys.com. Again, that email is contact@cpgguys.com. And maybe you can join us on the podcast just like Ibraheem did. Don't forget to drop us a reading at cpgguys.com on our website on the navigation bar all the way up top. Sincere thank you to our 23K plus followers on LinkedIn. We know this number wasn't done overnight, and it's a very large number considering this is the LinkedIn platform. But thank you to every single one of you for joining, having a discussion, and telling us how to shape the show. The show doesn't exist without you. Ibraheem, thank you for being a guest today. This was awesome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it, man. It's a great set of questions.
Mr. Bond, it's that part of the show where I get you to actually summarize what we learned and what we can pass on as learnings to the audience. Over to you.
Yeah, Shri, I love this conversation. The fact that A Dozen Cousins is based on the idea that a natural food brand with convenience, based on great flavors that use quality ingredients, could be successful. That's a great recipe, right? And the aspiration to make restaurant quality item in under 20 minutes, particularly in the sauce business. Wow, what a good approach. Ibraheem's big family was inspiration for this. The fact that meals were a glue that kept that family together, it was really what caused them to gather. And then having a father who was an entrepreneur inspired him to do exactly the same. First, though, getting the fundamental foundational training on how to think from his education at the University of Pennsylvania and the Wharton School, one of the Ivy League schools that I haven't attended or done a certificate at, so that's good. I'm going to have to put that on my list. And then he went to General Mills, where he got the foundational training on how to build and manage and scale a brand. I think that is terrific. How to sell to retailers, how to vet a supply chain were terms that he used. But when he launched his own brand, having a clear mission around using the food to inspire culture and live healthier lives would be the focus of this business. Launched at Amazon, got that e-commerce experience, but quickly moved into Whole Foods. And without any predominant sales data on that, built a relationship with a key person at Whole Foods that helped get national distribution, which was kind of the springboard to success, to turn and then be able to go against the grain from where his investors and boards might have thought to stay away from Walmart because of many of its reputation and its focus on who their consumer audience was. And Ibraheem said, no, this is a very diverse community. We don't have to have everyone at Walmart buying our product, but the people who will like our product, they shop Walmart. And so we really need to be there. I think that's terrific. And understanding that, particularly in performance on the digital shelf, or even people are walking through the store and using their mobile app to browse products, that content was going to be critical to success. And so having the right focus on content that helps drive search, both SEM and SEO, would be a critical component to the success of the brand. Challenges as a minority owner, I think we know and understand that there's a built-in disadvantage, and just having to work twice as hard in order to get the success. And the fact that the way that he started building out his brand and getting attention of retailers was some of the venues that you and I, Shri, would have thought of, right? Expo East, Expo West, and Natural Product Food. A lot of brands that are emerging, they spend the entirety of their marketing budget on one or both of those events, understanding in the hopes that that buyer from a very large grocery retailer walks by, takes notice of the brand, and says, that's something I want to take a chance on for my products. I can absolutely understand that. But then after that, as the brand begins to scale, that's when you bring on brokers to help accelerate and expand that business. I love the fact that Ibraheem talked about playing in forgotten categories where there's been limited innovation. You know, a lot of people said that about the milk category 10 years ago. And then Coca-Cola came along with Fairlife and revolutionized the milk category. And a lot of people thought that about the cocktail mixer category. And then our friend Bob Arnold and John Mount from Q Mixers came along, and they have just revolutionized and seen explosive growth in that category. So who's to say that these forgotten categories aren't ripe for innovation and ripe for growth and success? Just the fact that he used the word legume. You know, we're an educational podcast here, Shri, and I love referring to what the actual it's not just a vegetable, it's a legume. But just again, driving mission, the ability to deliver home quality foods ready in 60 seconds or less. What a great objective. Quality, natural ingredients with fabulous taste, driven by the discovery that bone broth was going to be a critical flavor enhancer to the product that they launched, and that they're creating culturally authentic cuisine. All of these, and then making sure that as they start to think about their growth and expansion, velocity is going to be the KPI. The pandemic was a big challenge, but they seem to have risen to the challenge. They were a little bit smaller than some of the big players, and therefore their ability to get caught up in terms of inventory was not quite as debilitating as some of the larger brands that had massive orders that they needed to fulfill. And that going forward, while they have had strong success with innovation, growth in the coming years will primarily be driven by expanding out the existing assortment and getting into net new retailers like HEB, where I think we'll have a little conversation offline, see what we can do to help with our dear friend here. So that's my assessment, Shri. It was a great conversation. I love doing this with you, man.
That was a thorough summary, Peter. That was awesome. And Ibraheem, I want to say congratulations and good luck to you at the same time as you continue to grow. Hopefully you'll come back here in a couple of years and we'll be talking about a portfolio that is the dozen cousins has moved from beans and rice, as you described, to many other subcategories, and we'll look forward to that. Peter, pleasure doing this with you. That's a wrap of this episode for our guests, and see you soon on another episode of the CPG Guys.
The content in this podcast episode is provided for general informational purposes only. By listening to our episode, you understand that no information contained in this episode should be construed as advice from CPG Guys LLC or the individual author, hosts, or guests, nor is it intended to be a substitute for research on any subject matter. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by CPG Guys LLC. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. The views expressed by CPG Guys LLC do not represent the views of their employers or the entity they represent. CPG Guys LLC expressly disclaims any and all liability or responsibility for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, consequential, or other damages arising out of any individual's use of, reference to, or inability to use this podcast or the information we present in this podcast.